For example, when the lockdown started, Prime Minister Rama decided to create a voice message. And basically the content of this message was, I'm quoting, it's Eddie, please wash your hands, don't leave your house because you feel like it, keep windows open and protect yourself from the media. That was the message that Albanians heard before placing any phone calls on their private mobile phones.
Hello and welcome to The Human Rights Defender, a podcast series in which we'll explore the work and lives of brave individuals standing up for our human rights. My name's Philip Merrill. I'm Communications Officer at Civil Rights Defenders, an international human rights organisation. And in this opening season, we'll be taking a closer look at the Western Balkans and Turkey, regions in which democracy and the rule of law have come under growing strain in recent years. Throughout the series, one topic which has really remained constant has been Western Balkan governments' handling of the COVID pandemic. Measures introduced, if you remember, were among the harshest in the world from the very start of the spread of the coronavirus. And quite simply, it's an issue which human rights defenders on the ground are dealing with on a day-to-day basis and in many ways shaping the future relationships between governments and civil society. And I feel despite this, there is one country which has really stood out, not so much in terms of the way it's handled the pandemic, but more in terms of how it's communicated it with wider society, and that's Albania. Our guest today is from Tirana. It's Lorin Kadiu, Executive Director at the Citizens Channel, independent media outlet, and also an interviewee of the Human Rights Defenders in the Western Balkans report, which we have discussed throughout this series. Lorin, hi, welcome, first of all. I want to actually bring you in with a recent quote of yours, where you said, "We live in times of dangerous communication crisis. The Albanian government is using coronavirus for small and short-term interests." What exactly are these small and short-term interests? How are they manifesting? And do you feel there is some space for dialogue between the government and independent journalists and civil society?
Actually, there's been very few space for dialogue, even with civil society and even with journalists. And I think this mainly comes because of the way the government practically decided to communicate about the pandemic and communicate about the virus. So the first thing I see as problematic is the role that the Prime Minister Edi Rama has decided to have in the communicating to the public towards measures related to the pandemic. Like, he decided to be like the main public character in communicating all of the restriction in a media that is not like an official channel, but it's his private Facebook page. And often this restriction came before they did the procedures related to amendments of law, for example, or setting regulations. And people started to get used to getting informed about restrictions or getting informed about measures that had a huge impact on their life by clicking and by scrolling through the feed of his personal Facebook account. And according to a monitoring we did at the Citizens Channel, we saw that, for example, in just 3 weeks in March, the Prime Minister's Facebook account, he posted 307 updates, and he live streamed for 47 hours in what is often considered as our first experience in being governed by social media, basically by Facebook. And to us, to journalists, to engaged citizens, to civil society, it's been very concerning because of the language they have chosen to communicate this situation. Actually, the main metaphor of choice was war against the pandemic, and we were put in a warlike situation with a rhetorical approach, meaning armored vehicles, the army on the street, heavy fines against people who violated the regulation, sometimes even fake news coming up from the public official channels. Basically, Prime Minister Rama decided to share a video which was shot somewhere else just to panic the audience and saying that this is how Spain treats protester, while actually it was shot somewhere else in a whole different context. Of course, he apologized after this, but this is an example to share the approach they had on communicating the war against the virus. And what is seen as problematic on our side, especially as journalists, is that we were set in the enemy front. And we've been facing hate speech and direct threats during this period. For example, when the lockdown started, Prime Minister Rama decided to create a voice message to be played automatically before every phone call. While there's still lots of concerns amongst journalists and human rights defenders, it yet remains unclear if this action was either legal or is it a violation of privacy or hate speech. And basically the content of this message was, I'm quoting, "It's Eddie, please wash your hands, don't leave your house because you feel like it, keep windows open and protect yourself from the media." That was the message that Albanians heard before placing any phone calls on their private mobile phones. So for us, it's been a harsh period, but also for the general public, because I've noticed people that were basically confused. Because in the same time they have distrust and negative perceptions of Albanian authorities and their capacity to handle the situation. And at the same time they were facing lots of fear that the infection might come to them. And the approach they had in communicating all this situation didn't help on lowering the fear levels, but only just increased them in I would say a very panic spreading way, and not so normal way that public officials should communicate to their citizens.
Does this come as a surprise though? Give us a picture of the overall situation for media freedoms and freedom of expression in Albania. And when you look back at this, did you expect any different from the government?
What I can say is that we already were not working in a very friendly environment. There was lots of issues going on and related to how free speech is considered, how independent voices are treated, especially you have the right to do public manifestation and you have the right to protest and to march and everything. But very often, even before the measures taken during the COVID-19 lockdown, you face lots of backlash, especially talking from a media perspective. Civic movements have been always on the edge, either under threats of violence, either ignored by the mainstream media, or either attacked by the mainstream media, which is often used as a whip, causing backlash to crucial moments of resistances and of movements. So this is one of the things I see as problematic and I see as violating the basic human rights and freedom in Albania. Talking about the context of the COVID-19 situation, we basically faced a much harder situation regarding, for example, to a violent approach towards protests, towards public gatherings. I can, for example, take the case of the demolition of the National Theatre, which has been one of the most problematic things that has happened in Albania in years, in the perspective of how governments lead approaches civic resistance and in terms of violence against protesters. So, long story short, the National Theatre was basically demolished in the early hours of May 17, following a 2.5-year-long resistance by activists, by artists, by journalists, by citizens of all kinds of professions. And they have continuously faced threats and intimidation during this whole resistance period. But it climaxed that day in the early hours, while a huge number of policemen with no ID badges, no identification, bursted in the National Theatre and took people, it was 400 policemen, they say, against a bunch of activists, 20, 30 activists. And they decided to demolish the theater basically at the last weekend of the lockdown. And also there was lots of violence going on in the protests following up the demolition of the theater. And there's still threats and intimidation going on now. For example, even in public communication sphere, how they use these PR tricks to damage the activists. I can tell a short story related to COVID-19. For example, there were two activists from the most vocal activists for the National Theatre cause. Actually, two brothers, actor and director Edmond and Robert Budina. Both were strong opponents of, and still are strong opponents of Frama and integral National Theatre activists. And what happened is that they got infected with COVID-19. And even before they had the results of their examination, they were already in the media. And the Prime Minister was already tweeting and saying good words about them, like, I'm very sad that you have the coronavirus. And this became an issue of, I can say, violation of privacy. We still don't know. In my opinion, it's not legal to publish the names of people infected, and this kind of use of media and leak of information, because information leaked from the laboratory where they do analysis. There's only one state-owned laboratory where they do analysis for COVID-19, and the fact that those two activists were infected leaked on the media, and then leaked on some important media channels that are always used in these crucial moments to spread news in a specific way that affects independent movements and causes. And basically what they try to do is to associate the protests going on after the destruction of the National Theatre with the spread of the COVID-19, and kind of use Twitter, use social media, use their power, all they have in hand to communicate in order to silence the protesters and the movements.
So one key piece of legislation which has really caught the attention of both Albanian civil society but also international organizations and institutions alike is the Anti-Defamation Package. Back in December last year, civil rights defenders joined 14 other organizations from Albania in condemning the legislation, for we feel it has the potential to have a chilling effect on media freedoms in the country. Talk us through some of the key points of the legislation. Why is it so controversial? And as an independent media outlet, do you feel it's detrimental to your survival?
Actually, it is, because I think the Anti-Defamation Package, I do not agree with the name, because that's what they actually do. Like, they put names on things, and on principle, no one would be against an Anti-Defamation Package. But it's not actually an Anti-Defamation Package, it's two media laws, trying to regulate by law the only independent media environment left, which is basically the online environment. And two of the most concerning issues are related to independence or basically dependence from the parliament of the bodies who are trying to regulate by law these media environments, and heavy fines that media would face if this law passes. So online media is, by this law, they're trying to regulate it by an institution called the Audiovisual Media Authority. They'll actually change its name in order to cover also online media sphere. And they'll have the right to put heavy fines towards media, countering not only the whole media, but also individual articles. And this was also one of the main concerns raised by the Venice Commission, that the fines are unproportionate to the violation in this case. And another problem is independence of this authority. Like, on paper, it's supposed to be an independent authority, but we've recently seen elections for the candidates for the directors of this authority, and they're basically dependent by the parliament, which is basically depended by only one political party in the Albanian situation we facing right now. So basically, it's heavy fines, 6 to 8 thousand euros. You have no right to complain. You have to first pay the fine and then start a legal procedure to complain in court about the fine. And it's basically tackling in my opinion, is basically tackling small independent media outlets like the one I represent. For example, given our personal perspective on this, if we had one or two fines like that, we would be obliged to close the office because there is no way that we have the financial possibility to pay for the fines and then wait for a court procedure that would take like 2 or 3 to get our money back, which is very problematic in this case. In terms of the resistance against these two media laws, there has been a huge synergy between all of the actors in the media environment, like media NGOs, Albanian and international media NGOs, also representatives from human rights organization. They've put pressure on the government, and right now we're at the phase where they decided to take a step back after all of the protests and public reactions and all of also the pressure coming not only from Albania but also from international institutions. And right now they decided to wait for the opinion of the Venice Commission, which a few weeks ago criticized this media law, calling it not ready to be adopted in this current form, and also suggesting it would have a very chilling effect on media freedom and be abused by rich people, oligarchs, to shield themselves from criticism. So basically, like, to wrap it up, there was huge protests. There was a very detailed opinion by the Venice Commission, which basically was yielding up on reports from the civic society, from independent news outlets, and also for the president, who didn't vote this law, who decided to take it back to the parliament. And also Council of Europe and other institutions were vocal about issues related to the Anti-Defamation Package.
Do you feel international institutions have been vocal enough against such gradual but systematic repression against the freedom of expression?
Taking into consideration how big institutions work and big organizations work, I can say they will never be like straightforward against the government, because then it's a matter of, diplomacy and everything. But in my opinion, I think it has to come from us. Like, if we raise the issues and they support the issues we raised, if we raise a voice enough, if we're able to document, to report violations, and then to send it to a big institution like the Council of Europe and everyone, I think they will be on the side of journalists in this case. If we don't do our homework, they will not be able to see and to basically identify the problems and then be vocal about it. Of course, I think they should be more vocal about it and kind of be a bit harsher on the way they publicly talk about, especially this media law, because in the end, in my opinion, it comes down to two basic concepts, like regulation by law and by force, or self-regulation by the media. And if these two laws pass, we will definitely close the door for self-regulation to the media, which is like even the OSCE media representative, the Council of Europe, and everyone are pushing for self-regulation everywhere. But if the media gets controlled by the government, if we have to be on the register, if we have to give our names, addresses, and all of our information to a board that is completely dependent, to an institution that is like totally dependent to the parliament, then it starts to be problematic in terms of censorship, self-censorship, because you always have this concern of facing a fine that is financial and is like, considering the medium wage here in Albania, I would have to work for 1 year to pay one of the fines. So they're basically shutting the door for self-regulation. It's of course our job, our work to self-regulate, but we need a more friendly environment. We need a more friendly relationship with public institutions for them to allow then the media to regulate itself. Because when it comes down to media ownership and to basically the big media outlets and national TVs, we've seen reports of their close links to the government, and we've seen reports of media ownership being owned only by four important and rich families who at the same time take lots of money from the public budget. So they have to make up their mind. They either are on the media side or either are against it, because what they do is they use the media as a tool to promote their agenda, to promote their voice, and to silence everyone else. And then they want to control this last segment of the media, which is the most independent, and is where most of the important things going on happen.
So in such environment, where independent journalists and human rights defenders face clearly preposterous and unproportional fines and sanctions from the government, what motivated someone like you to enter this field and to lead an independent media outlet?
So personally, like in a personal point of view, I started my career working in a human rights news outlet in Albania called Historia Ime. And since I was at the first year at the university, we were doing human rights dedicated journalism and reporting about minorities, reporting about human rights violation. And actually, during my whole career afterwards, I've seen this profession as an opportunity to give voice to the people who don't have the chance to express their opinions and their concerns in this very hostile media environment against unrepresented groups. So I always call it responsibility that comes with the independence. So if I'm lucky enough to be independent, to work in a sector which is the non-profit media sector and the non-profit media environment, which is not controlled by links related to business and links related to politics, I also have the responsibility to be more precise about what I report, to be more human about I report, and to basically be better journalists and to report about what other media and what other people do not always talk about. And I see this as a mission towards the truth all the time. And I see journalism and human rights work very linked, especially in an environment like Albania, where you always or often get very few chances to be heard if you are poor, if you are from a minority, if you are, I don't know, even if you're young or if you're gay or if you're Roma or if you're Egyptian, you get very few chances to express concerns in the media.
So you have an interesting approach at Citizens Channel, which is to really encourage citizens and mobile journalism through the use of social media, in many ways sort of fighting the government and its narratives on that same front in which it seems to have sort of enhanced its repression against the freedom of expression. Talk us through a bit about this approach, and how effective has it been, do you feel, in illuminating some of these issues which often go underreported in wider society?
So, talking about the Citizens Channel, we are a media NGO basically established and managed by young professionals. We're among the youngest organizations and newsrooms around, and we see our work as aiming towards providing not only our reporting, but aiming to serve also as a free space for developing citizens journalism and promoting values of fundamental human rights and freedoms. Our approach is mainly, I always say, we try to use the same tools the government uses to spread information. So if they want to be on Facebook, we will be also on Facebook. If they want to be on social media, we will use the same I would say, weapons in this war for public attention. So our approach is towards communities, towards unrepresented citizens, and Basically, we are a newsroom that works on mobile journalism reporting techniques. And we try to use innovation, we try to use independence that mobile journalism allows you to basically report on issues that we consider that don't take enough place in the mainstream media. For example, we work with the students and youth movement, following closely protests and issues related to youth and students' rights. We report on labor rights, workers' unions, including protests in Bulciza, in the coal mine, which has been a very problematic environment recently. Issues related to farmers, call center workers, small business owners. We also try to have a gender-sensitive approach and report about issues related to gender-based violence and the feminist movement that is starting to grow impressively here in Albania. We work on reporting about rights of minorities, ethnic minorities like Roma and Egyptians, and also LGBTI minorities. And we also have an approach focused on what we basically were talking before, freedom of media and freedom of speech. Like we're vocal about issues related to anti-defamation law, journalist rights, media literacy and media trainings for young journalists. And in the end, we try to report everything that's related to public space, environment, and independent civic movements that don't always get enough space and attention, and often get silenced by the mainstream media.
Final question, and I guess this is now our trademark attempt to leave episodes off on a positive note with guests, to try to seek some sort of solutions, despite the clearly worsening situation for independent journalists and human rights defenders across the region. And that's exactly that. When you look at the Western Balkans and the backsliding of democracy, the increasing repression against the freedom of expression, minority groups and so on, how do we break this cycle? What are some of the answers that we as civil society can provide and come up with to secure a better tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Basically, it's not only Albania that is facing issues related to rule of law, democracy, and violation of human rights. Like the picture in all of the Balkans is concerning. But I would say that where we want to go with what we're doing, it's not always depending on us. But what's the core mission of our work is always to push for more accountability, to push for a more representative media, and to push for a more a media that is closer to the citizens concerned. And regarding to your question about where is the light, I think you have to hit the button to start rising. So I'm very excited about some very interesting, even civic and also other kinds of movements that are starting to grow here in Albania. For example, there's a very important students movement that's starting to take an important place in the public sphere. There's also a feminist movement pushing for women's rights and pushing against all the violent society that comes with our inherited patriarchy lifestyle. And there's also lots of people trying to do something about what's happening with the environment, with the destruction of forests and rivers and building of hydropower plants. And there's also people that try to push for more transparency and more accountability. And I think if we do our best so that these groups of people are always represented and always have a place that they will be uncensored and free to say whatever they want to say, we are doing our job right.
Thank you, Lorin, for sharing your thoughts. We're really proud to have supported partners in Albania on many of the issues that we've discussed today. So for more information about our work, please visit our website at www.crd.org or follow our social media channels. Thank you. Bye-bye.